I'd like to welcome everyone for coming to Talking to Teachers about Trauma Beyond the Family Tree Assignment. In this workshop, we will hear from Marty Cardona and Carol Renda. Before we begin, I want to introduce myself. I'm Kate Doyle-Bunker. I'm a family support specialist with AFFCNY, and I'll be your moderator for the Zoom today. I also want to remind everyone that training certificates are available for this conference, and I'll be putting the link for requests in the chat box. I'll also be putting in two other links, one for our book table fundraiser and the other one for our conference evaluation. Please know that if you have any questions during the workshop, please feel free to put them in the chat unless the presenters specifically ask for anyone to unmute themselves. I will keep everyone muted so that we can hear the speakers very clearly. Marty Cardona is a permanency specialist at Hillside Children's Center. Marty is an adoptive parent with more than 40 years of experience as an adoption caseworker. She is a retired public elementary school principal and former director of special education, a classroom teacher, and a speech therapist. Currently, Marty is a permanency specialist and adoption caseworker at Hillside Children's Center in the Regional Permanency Resource Center, RPRC's. Work focuses on engaging the entire family, and this program grew out of a special effort to engage teens in an ongoing program. With knowledge of how school works, Marty has provided relevant information about the effects of trauma in the classroom. Carol Renda is a permanency specialist with Hillside Children's Center, and the workshop today is a basic understanding of trauma and loss associated with adoption and how that might affect a child's attachment and behavior. And with that, let's get started.
Thank you so much, Kate. And thank you to all of you. If you weren't here a few minutes ago, we were all saying how wonderful it is on this beautiful day that we can wear shorts to this conference and be comfortable, even though we really miss all being together. So we would like to dig in today using the conference theme of what lies beneath to talk about what actually is going on at school and why it's important to talk about that. And Carol's going to manage our slides, so we'll move on to the next one. So the families that we serve in the Regional Permanency Resource Center, we can explain more about what that is if we need to later on, let us know. Oftentimes we serve parents who are new to parenting a school-age child. So Carol, you want to just tell us about how your children joined your family and the ages they were?
Yeah, sure. I met my daughter when she was entering 4th grade and my son when he was entering 8th grade. And I'm thankful that Marty kind of threw that to me because I really wanted to give out a kudos and appreciation to teachers because my son had an IEP, he was in special ed, and a lot of learning challenges and behavioral challenges. And the support that I received and he received during those years of school, honestly, I don't think he would have made it without the supports that he received from the teachers. I mean, everyone from the special ed director, literally to the janitor of the school, just embraced him and supported him. And so I just wanted to kind of tip my hat to teachers.
So Carol is a great example of a family who we might work with now, who has never negotiated the school scene and all of a sudden is needing to advocate for their child, but feeling a little bit uncertain. And so seeking support through the Permanency Center. We also have families who are really used to school, but they're just overwhelmed by the Committee on Special Education, fondly known as CSE, 504, which are plans to provide modifications for people with students with disabilities in this case, or just the assessment processes that go on at school. Others of our children coming in international adoption often need support at school, and the parents, especially if they're new parents, don't know how to access that or what actually is available, so they worry about when to send the child to school. So we're here to try to facilitate all of that with our families who are enrolled in the Permanency Resource Center. We have experienced parents often, or inexperienced ones, who are worried that their children are exhibiting unexpected behaviors at school. So all of a sudden school is causing some sort of trigger and they're getting concerns from the teachers that they aren't sure about. We have parents who worry that their children have a better attachment to the teacher than to themselves, and we'll talk about that, why that comes about sometimes, and just parents who generally feel misunderstood when trying to talk to the schools about adoption or trauma. And as Kate said in the introduction, I have spent more than 30 years working in the public school system. So I did that in the daytime and the adoption casework at night. And am a parent of 2 children through adoption, as well as 4 biological children. My children came from another country, and I know even though I was familiar with the school system, it took a little bit of figuring out how to help them adjust to school once they first came. So I wish that I had a permanency specialist to help with that back. I hadn't heard of those then. Some of the things that we do with families, first of all, our ideal situation is that we can at home with them. Normally in our program, we make at least 1 home visit a month or meet the family out somewhere if they prefer that. So what we would prefer is that we're able to facilitate brainstorm them and feel capable of going into school. But if not, we do accompany them to teacher conferences to try to insert just the basic knowledge that we would have about adoption and trauma without personalizing it to the child. We have provided staff development, either to staffing a specific child or for entire faculties at buildings, and also have either help people prep to go into those special education. The CPSE is the preschool component of special education, or for the 504 meetings. So we'll do pre-meetings with families or go along to them with them to the meeting. Lately, pretty easy to do because they're all done just like this by Zoom. The reason that we think it's important to talk to, I say teachers just really because the title was clear if we said that, but I mean the entire school staff, is because only about 3 to 5% of American families have adopted children. So it's very likely that you have a faculty at your child's school that may not be overly familiar with adoption. Now, I would say that in the last 5 to 10 years, teachers and staff members have become accustomed to the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experience research, the 10-question survey that usually goes along with that at school. So they know about that, and they know that if they have children in their classroom who have an ACE, they are at some risk. But I don't think that they easily associate the idea of that risk with adoption. So we'll look at some of the misconceptions that lead to that. I would say probably if we were to take ourselves on a walk today to any public place and just start interviewing people about adoption, most people unfamiliar with it would say adoption is a happy ending to what was a troubling situation. The child is very fortunate to be adopted, and once they come to you, they come with a clean slate. Oftentimes we hear, wow, you're amazing to take on a child with so many challenges. So these are the kind of things that I think actually run deep. When I think about bias that people have, I think that this is very much a part of that. Sometimes people think that the teachers, school staff think the child should be proud, and they may say it to them, you should be proud of being chosen and tell us about your adoption story. Most children are not particularly want to do that when they're at school. Also, they may think that adoption is one and done. There's no need to look back. They don't think of it as a journey. They think of it as a single day event. And then also saying to the parents, well, you knew what you were getting into. And if this is too much, maybe this isn't what you should be doing. So, hopefully you as parents, if your parents in our audience haven't heard a lot of that, and certainly not all teachers will say that sort of thing to families, but you just need to be aware that the whole idea that we're aware of in the field of trauma with adoption has not necessarily permeated the school staff as far as our experience with that. Today, we're going to dig into this a little further, and we know that attachment, is really at the heart of the matter here. So Carol is going to give us some information and review about attachment and how that, then we'll take that into how that plays out at school.
Yeah, I just want to kind of take a little bit of a deep dive into attachment, earliest attachments and experiences, relationships, environment, and how that really kind of shapes our view of the world, how we communicate, how we relate, how we handle life's ups and downs. One of the primary models that our Permanency Resource Center uses is called trust-based relational intervention, or TBRI. Created at the Child Institute of Development with Karen Purvis and David Cross. And one of the things that they do in their model early on is they kind of challenge the adults in the kiddos' lives to take inventory of our own attachment styles. How were we parented? What do we bring to the table, if you will? Especially in this case, when we're dealing with, encountering kids with challenging behaviors and trauma histories. How do we bring calm to the situation? Do their behaviors and responses trigger us? So kind of taking that self-inventory, and looking inward really helps us in our ability to be able to handle these kinds of behaviors and stuff that we kind of encounter. So I want to talk a little bit about attachment, but I want to go a little bit below the surface, a little bit of what lies beneath. And I want to look at it from the biological standpoint. What is happening in the brain during these very early months of attachment? Well, healthy attachment, when an infant expresses their need and they're in a predictable, nurturing, stable home with loving, safe caregiver who comes and tends to that need quickly, the way that need is met, what is happening in the brain as that need is met in that nurturing, caring way, that the interactions that take place, when you're changing a baby's diaper, you change a baby's diaper, instead of just putting the baby back in the playpen or in the crib, having those tender moments, those tender interactions with infants, all of those things, the touch, playing with their legs a little bit, rubbing that, tickling their chin, holding them, rocking them in your arm, that eye contact, all of those things are sending signals to your brain to help form those connections those attachment connections in our brain. So when the baby's in distress, the alarm system's going off in the brain. What's happening is that sympathetic nervous system, right, is sending all this alarm. I'm in distress. Those exhibitory neurotransmitters are going off. So in this environment, this nurturing, predictable, loving caregiver comes quickly and meets those needs in those ways. What's happening is in that infant's brain, these systems are developing. They're allowed to develop. They're allowed to activate. Those interactions are literally activating those signals in the brain and bringing balance. So when that sympathetic nervous system is going, the care that caregiver is expressing brings that parasympathetic nervous system into balance. So now that brings comfort to the infant. So what does that do? As we mentioned before, early attachment helps our view of the world. So this kind of healthy attachment gives us the building blocks to be able to trust, right? Oh, I can trust adults because I know that they're going to take care of me. I feel good about myself. I feel important. I'm not afraid to express needs because I know that if I express a need, my systems in my brain tell me that that's okay. It's going to be met. And most importantly, I think, is it's a building block to promote positive mental health. Unfortunately, a lot of the kiddos that we encounter in foster and adoptive care don't get that healthy attachment. When they express their need, it may be met, but it may not be met sufficiently. And for all kinds of different reasons. Again, a lot of our kiddos that come into care, they're from abusive backgrounds, neglect, some type of trauma. Maybe they experienced, a very frightening caregiver early on, a chaotic household. All of these things still affecting the biology of our brain, right? But they're not allowing those systems to activate. They're not allowing those systems to balance out. They either are underdeveloped or some of them may not even come online at all. So unfortunately, that kind of promotes the things that we see in kids where it's hard to trust an adult. We grow up, we have low self-esteem, don't really feel important in life or that our voice is heard. And unfortunately, we experience a lot of mental health issues, which we know with a lot of the kiddos that come in our care. I just want to take a quick look at this of noting the fact that our brain develops in an upward way. It's kind of like a scaffolding or layers, if you will. And our brainstem or the downstairs of our brain, that's intact in utero. So when we come into this world, that is firing on all systems, that amygdala, that stress response system, regulatory systems, those are there. And that is why attachment early on, especially in these first couple months of life, are very crucial to our development, because the way that we're nurtured and cared for in those very early months and years, again, most crucially, the first couple, determines how those systems, how our biological systems in our brain are going to develop and be activated. So typical development, upside down triangle there. As the brain grows, it starts with that brainstem and all those survival mechanisms, right, that causes our heart to beat, gives us oxygen to breathe, levels all that out. Then we have in the middle part of our brain, our emotional area, and then our cortex up at the top, which is, as most of you know, our thinking brain, reasoning brain, our learning part of our brain. Again, unfortunately, a lot of kids in foster and adoptive care come from that disrupted type of attachment. So what's happening is with that lower part of their brain that is so overworked because of disruption early on. They didn't have that nurturing. They didn't have that predictability, that stable environment, that loving, caring adult that came quickly to meet those needs. If the needs were met, maybe in changing that diaper, the adult just kind of put the baby back. Didn't have those interactions that formed those connections in the brain to allow those signals, balancing those systems, those inner systems. So when these kids kind of come to school, when these kids, because of that overexpanded, because that amygdala, that survival part of our brain gets so overworked, it literally kind of swells and expands. So that becomes, it inhibits our ability to learn at times, because when we're talking, when a teacher is giving a lesson in a class, you're coming from your cortex, right? You're coming from down the top of your brain down and out. Whenever we receive information, we receive it first in the lower part of our brain. It's got to go up. It's got to go up those stairs in order for us to be able to comprehend, to understand, to learn, to put those pieces together, and allow those systems. Again, what's happening in the brain, this is kind of the perspective I wanted to come from today, is understanding what's happening in the brain during all of these interactions in our environments. And so the upper part of the brain, sometimes that information, it doesn't get there, or it gets there all fragmented in pieces. So what does this actually look like in the classroom? Oh no, no, it froze.
Uh-oh.
I'll keep trying. But anyway, the next slide is two brains showing a learning brain versus a survival brain. And when you get your kiddos in this with this, nurturing, predictable, strong, early, healthy attachment that we call typical development, they come into the classroom, their cortex, their upper brain here, they're open for business. They're able to receive information that you want to give them. They're able to work on their, project or classwork for the day. They may encounter, some hiccups along the way, but because their baseline is set at 0. Nope, I was trying to move it. Because their baseline is set at 0, they're not going to shoot up to, they're not going to go from 0 to 60. Typically, just because they run across a math problem on a test that, is too difficult, because they know, because it was instilled in them early, with early healthy attachment, they know that they can, I just got to ask my teacher. She's going to come and help me get through this, and it'll be fine. On the other hand, I'm so excited. I'm so proud of that slide. On the other hand, the kiddo with that very early kind of disrupted attachment with that overgrown lower part of their brain, that amygdala on fire, are hyper vigilant. They're always out there looking, just waiting, because their brain was trained. Those connections in the brain either never formed, or they're very loose. So the signals get crossed very easily, or they don't even get received at all. So it makes it very difficult to receive that information and to learn, because they're in that hyper-focused threat, always just looking for a threat. That's why sometimes a teacher can come up behind a student while they're doing their work and look over their shoulder. And to that brain, to that kiddo's brain who had that insufficient, right, lacked nurture, lacked predictability, that's a threat. The brain perceives that proximity of a big human standing over me as a threat. So the reaction of the kiddo is, oh, get away from me, or some type of negative response to the teacher. And you're thinking, what the heck's going on? What's wrong with you? Why are you, but because the way the brain was wired, and the way that those systems were disrupted, and not able to, when their sympathetic nervous system was kicking in those distress moments, there was not that nurturing, caring attention given to where the brain was able to develop and be able to consistently activate that parasympathetic nervous system part of the brain to bring that balance of calm. Well, the good news is, this is still not working. The good news is, as Marty's going to get into this, hopefully, in a few minutes, is there are things to do there are things that you can do in the classroom, and she's going to give you some strategies to use. In our program with parents, we try to encourage a lot of proactive skills. We try to help parents look through the lens of, raising your kid from where his brain is at, or her brain is at, looking at when we're encountering those, challenging behaviors, and some of them can be pretty challenging, to kind of step back a little bit and ask, okay, what does this child need from me right now? What am I bringing? First of all, look at, what am I bringing to this encounter? If I'm able to stay calm and regulated, I'm sending those messages to that kiddo's brain that it's okay, everything's okay, do what you need to do, but I'm here, I'm safe, right? I am not going anywhere. So you're sending those messages. And again, because it's a cycle, the more that we do that, the more that kiddo can encounter those safe interactions, the more we're going to be able to calm that lower part of the brain and open that cortex. So basically, when we got a kiddo in survival brain in the classroom, the first thing that we need to do is look at regulating that child, not trying to punish that child, not trying to force more information into them, because their cortex is not open for business. It's closed. The learning part of their brain, the thinking part, reasoning, done. So if again, Marty's going to get go over some strategies that you can use in the classroom and in the home as well, to help take that survival brain and bring some regulation and emotional stability, and then open that cortex up for learning.
You good, Carol?
I'm good.
Okay, so you're not going to see the slides now. I'm going to look at them on a side-by-side computer here just to keep us tracking. But I believe all the slides can be made available to you through the conference. So you will have them eventually. And I would point out that really what we're going through here is the same program that we do with school staff. So everything that Carol shared, we would normally be sharing with school staff after we already went over it with families beforehand. But many of them have learned this in their pre-adoption training. Oh, look at this. It's going to move.
Right, you're on.
Yeah. Okay. So that was wonderful. Thank
I
you.
guess it needed a minute.
I think so, right? It wanted you to be able to talk. My favorite slide, by the way. But anyhow, so as Carol said, you know, if we're talking about a child coming from broken attachment, or just a child who is improving in terms of attachment, but has moved from home to home, sometimes they are actually comfortable at school because, as we go on to the next slide, teachers are short-term relationships, right? They only need to have them for one period each day or for one school year. So they're very comfortable in those short-lived relationships and may, you know, so the teacher sometimes we find is saying to the parent, I don't know what you're talking about because everything is fine here. It must be that that classroom feels safe, but also the teacher is not asking for the depth of relationship that the family is asking for.
Sorry, it froze again.
Oh, it's stuck again. Okay, I wondered what was going on over there. Okay, so we then go over with the teachers some of the common behaviors that you see in school in disrupted attachment. Carol listed some of those for you when she was talking, what could be examples. Lying and stealing certainly are some that immediately come to mind that can be very disconcerting at school. I would tell you that, you know, when in my years as a principal, when teachers would send children, and not necessarily children who are adopted, but any children, to the office for discipline, what they were really hoping for was good scolding. What I would always say to them is, what happened? Tell me what happened. Tell me if you were making, now I would have to say YouTube, but I've been retired for a few years from the job. But I would say, if you're making me a video, what would I see? And it would, as they began to relax and just talk about whatever happened that led to what they did, you would start to get the child's perspective, which is so important to understand in order to realize where the effects of any kind of dysregulation they have came into play, and that no, this wasn't necessarily something that they did to out of spite or to be unkind, but something they did to meet a need that they have. So sometimes you'll see a child who presents at school who's angry and aggressive, often just trying to push people away, not wanting to connect with people. Another thing that's very disconcerting to teachers. Because as Carol said, we work in the trust-based relationship intervention program out of Texas Christian University. Karen Purvis, primary author of that. We always talk about the 3 pillars of attachment, and they apply very well in the classroom also. So sorry that I'm looking a little to the side just to see the slide as I talk to you. The child needs to be safe, needs to feel safe. And again, Carol emphasized how important that is and how that in a well-attached child, securely attached child is built right from the get-go. But you can begin to offer that same consistent care. You think about that baby that needs the bottle or the diaper change. That could be the kiddo that's sitting in front of you in 4th grade that does need your steady, calm attention over and over again. I can think of, again, over the years of being a principal and being a teacher, situations where teachers were just exasperated by that. But once they could understand what lies beneath it, they were in a little better shape to be able to respond to it. So just offering consistent care, being responsive, using warm interactions and simple words, again, using that diagram, that great diagram that Carol had up for a while, just to be sure that you're not overloading that cortex when the child is really operating in the lower brain. And then preparing the child for any transition. So we know that the child's response oftentimes when they feel threatened is the flight, fight, or freeze. When you think of the freezing person, I recently had a situation with a family like that, where I had a little girl who came from institutional care in another country into a suburban public school. And as long as you didn't ask her any questions, she appeared perfectly fine. She would sit at her desk, she would be compliant, she was very comfortable meeting the teacher's expectations that way. When the teacher looked at her directly and asked a question, even a simple question, she would absolutely freeze. And within a few minutes of that freezing, she would be in a meltdown. So, once we were able to look at what was really happening there, because, it would be normal for a child or for a teacher, I'm sorry, to think, if I ask you what's your favorite color, that's not scary, right? This is a very ordinary question. But for this child, just that act of the teacher putting her on the spot was enough to take her out for the rest of the afternoon. So second pillar is connection. And this is a really important part when we're talking to school staff, because sometimes at this stage in the presentation, they're feeling like what you're really saying is, I need to treat this child with kid gloves. I need to make a lot of exceptions around this child. I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this with another 20 children in the classroom as well. So at this point, we really want to reassure school staff that you still are the boss. You just need to become a safe boss. So think for yourself about what you think of a safe boss. I think of a safe boss as one who is calm and well regulated and who doesn't pose a lot of surprises, so that I can predict what's going to happen next. And if you think of that brain diagram that Carol used, when you see a typical child development in a secure attachment, moving up from the lower brain into the midbrain and then the cortex, you'll know that that self-regulation is important in that, and being able to predict is a key to that, so that there are no surprises. So for my little girl who didn't like to be asked her favorite color that we just talked about, if you started on the other side of the room and said, here's what we're going to do, I'm going to go around the room and ask everybody this favorite color, I will be coming to you, Carol, in a few minutes. But if you don't want to share with us today, and you say this to everybody, if you don't want to share with us today, you can pass. Well, I'm off the hot seat. I don't have to answer. So, but do that repeatedly, provide a little bit of stress, but then provide a lot of comfort to go along with it. We also recommend to teachers that they, in a secondary school, know where a calming spot is. Now, interestingly, many schools are creating calming spots these days, so that's a good thing. But in primary classrooms, very often it's right in the classroom. It just can be off to the side. And that goes along with the notion of not sending the child away. not sending the child to the principal, the counselor, the nurse, whatever, but pulling them in, letting them know that you still care, you are still the safe boss, you are going to take care of them. But they still need to move along or do their work within the classroom. So that, I think, is a really important message to teachers that we try to get across, and is typically well received. Also, Care and Purpose would recommend using the ideal approach to communicate. So again, responding immediately. You think of bringing that baby the bottle right away while they're screaming. Requiring eye contact, I would say that could be different depending on culture. So something to take into account. But if you've ever seen a TBRI or a Care and Purpose video, she does require the child to stand or sit and make eye contact with her before she proceeds to speak with them, and move in as closely as the child allows. Use the fewest words possible, remembering that you're probably not operating on full steam ahead with the brain. They're probably not in the cortex at that point. And to offer a redo, and when the redo works, give immediate, concise praise, leveling your response at the behavior, not at the child. So those are all just some simple strategies that can go to work. And many teachers do this all the time and they know it, but I think just don't necessarily know that it needs to be applied consistently with our children. And so the final pillar of the three, self-regulation, there are a lot of fun things you can do. This takes a while to develop. It's not something that you're going to work on, once a week and it's going to be fine. It needs, again, to be consistent and developed over time. And some of the fun things, I think, now many schools nowadays use the zone program, especially elementary schools, where they're talking about red, yellow, and green zones. So green is you're all set and ready to work. You feel good, you're okay. Red is, no, I'm out of control. There's no way I can do this work. Yellow is probably very common, like, I could do it, but I don't really want to do it right now because he's looking at me, she's poking me, whatever. So the teacher will ask the child, what zone are you in? And that just helps the child to identify where they are, which is a beginning of a calming technique. Not asking them to do anything about it, just ask them where they are. And you'll see many visual displays of this in elementary classrooms. They're very easy to make as well. We know that it's important for our kids to be well hydrated, and offering healthy snacks every couple of hours. Sometimes that is a challenge in schools. The water sometimes is a challenge as well. But again, we do talk to teachers about how important that is to help the child with self-regulation. The next few things are really fun things that we suggest to teachers that they do with the whole class. The magic mustache is just simply putting your finger above your top lip beneath your nose. That will lay on a pressure point for the parasympathetic nervous system. It's very calming. Very often when we do this talk in schools, teachers and principals begin to use this themselves, and they find it really enjoyable to do and funny, kind of funny. So they're, open to it. The blowing soup, again, just as a way to regulate. Sometimes playing with the kids, you'll ask them, what kind of soup do you want to blow today? And just practice that with them as a regulatory technique. The chair push-ups, you can do one right now. Just put your hands on the side of your chair, push yourself up, let yourself fall back down again. Again, just giving sensory input to help with that regulation. And then we would encourage the school staff to mirror a relaxed posture, because then that's more likely to help the child engage in the relaxed posture as well. The last thing you want to say to them is calm down. In other words, you don't want to say that. I should say it that way instead. Is it moving or we're stuck?
No, we're stuck.
Okay, let me
My
move.
apologies.
That's okay. We'll figure it out.
I think we're.
Oh, the other piece of that is just in terms of the fun things you can do to purposely dysregulate the whole class. Very scary to a beginning struggling teacher or a tired teacher by doing group games, doing dances. There are a lot of these nowadays that our teachers will lead them on the big screen in their classroom, the smart board, so that they actually can participate with the kids, which is the most fun for the kids, and just group activities so that you can practice all those calming activities and have fun with it. The final topic that we talk to teachers about is positive adoption language, and probably most of you are very familiar with that, and it seems obvious, but just think about some of the things that have perhaps been said to you with all the best of intentions. And again, just as Carol said at the beginning, school is our partner. It's so important to have this close partnership with school and to understand each other. So even though this may seem obvious, I think it's a good idea to go over. I always tell the story of when I was a teacher. I was teaching a 12-on-1 class, and my children in the special education class pushed into a kindergarten because they were kindergarten age, a regular kindergarten. The kindergarten teacher, who was a good friend of mine, and we typically ate lunch together, we planned our lessons together. One day, after we read a story about children being adopted, said to me, "Mrs. Cardona," this is in front of the kids, "how many of your children are really yours? Tell the class how many are really yours." Now I'm going to blow this lesson because my answer was all of them are. I have 6 and they're all truly mine. And later I said to her, because that wasn't what she wanted me to say, later I said to her, what you really want to say to me is how many of your children were born to you, how many of your children joined your family through adoption. And she's actually, I said, how many are biological children? And she said, biological children? That's a crazy way to talk about it. I said, but that's an inclusive way to talk about it because they are all truly my children. And when you ask me a question like that, most particularly if there were children in the class who had joined their family through adoption, or if my children happen to be in the conversation, that's a divisive way to talk about it and can be hurtful. So just, it may seem like common sense, but I think sometimes it's just part of establishing the ground rules, so to speak, for how to talk about this. So same thing, and again, I'm sure that most of you have heard these before, that the parent made a plan for adoption versus giving up, abandoning, surrendering, those kind of trigger words that are emotional triggers for the parents as well as the children. We have a list of those that you can get. I don't want to make you listen to all that because I think that you know much of it. I think the other thing to bear in mind and to respond in a self-regulated and calm way when this comes into the conversation is the kind of microaggressions that occur in conversations with parents who have adopted, like, are they really yours? How much do they cost? Are you worried that they're going to ask questions about their family? Couldn't you have your own children? Will the real parents ever come back to get the child? One that I got all the time, are they really brother and sister? To which I was said yes, even though my 2 children who are adopted are not biologically brother and sister, but they really are now. And then another one, when I was observing a child for our program in a classroom, the teacher was very worried about how the child didn't respond in class. And so had invited me in to observe the child. And the lesson that day was about holidays. So the question that she asked the class, this was a special education class, there were 5 students. The child that I was observing was one of the 5, and this was 4th grade. So they were talking about holidays in other countries. This child had been born in another country. And so she asked the class, tell us about the Christmas traditions in your family. Tell us about how Christmas was celebrated. Well, this little one had not had a family to live in her memory until she joined her adoptive family. She had been living in an institution, immediately froze, immediately decompensated. But the teacher said, that's such, we all want to talk about Christmas. It's happy. It wasn't happy for her. And so just those simple sorts of things to raise awareness, because you can see where this is relatively new teacher, why she just hadn't thought that through and understood why that would be such a trigger for this child. She thought it was a very low-cost question, if you will, same as asking you your favorite color, that it wasn't going to be any kind of big deal to answer about that. I know for years, my 2 children were born in South Korea. People asked, what is the most, could you send in a Korean Christmas dessert? Well, there isn't a Korean Christmas dessert. So then that always led to a conversation about, really? Because I was really counting on that. I'm like, sorry, I can't produce it. It's not there. But that can be uncomfortable for the children because they don't want to be the token ones representing their country. They want to be just a member of that class family. So in conclusion, we want to say to you, know that it is your right and your responsibility to advocate for your child at school, but as permanency specialists, we are always available to walk the journey with you. That's actually what our job is. When you go to do so, to advocate for the child, share what your child needs. But I would say, this is my perspective, it might not necessarily be everyone's, share as little as possible about your child's background. That belongs to them. So I don't think it's necessary to say, here is my child, Susan, who has been in 5 foster homes, and now here she is with me. I would say, here is my child, Susan, who is going to do best with a teacher who is low key, who is going to do best with this kind of classroom or that kind of classroom. That's where I think where we've been called in to do the training with teachers, it's been helpful because we can talk in generalities without giving the history of a specific child. So I think that that's an important piece of it. Ask as many questions at school as you need to. Ask for help in navigating the special education process if you find yourself going down that. You can do it through a resource center, or you can also do it by finding advocates in your community, and we're able to help with that if you need. So in closing, we just want to say that everyone in New York, well, just about everyone who has adopted or foster families has access to the Regional Permanency Resource Centers across the state. That is the organization or the group that Carol and I work for. We work through Hillside with our agencies all across the state that offer this service at no charge to families. And there will be an appendix that includes the list of agencies in each different county. It's funded by OCFS, and it's just such an amazing service at no cost to the families. I wish that I had it 40 years ago, because it's just great to have somebody to walk with you. And Carol, I know you wanted to say something in closing as well.
Well, no, I just wanted to say, I was reading the chat. I just wanted to say that that listing that Marty just mentioned of the RPRCs in all of the counties, you can find that on the AFFCNY website. They have a whole page dedicated to that with a map, and you can just click on the county that you're in, and it will show you, you roll over it, it will show you what agency has an RPRC in that county.